I've been spending a lot of time lately just being. And if you have ADHD, you know how loaded that sentence is. Immobility, whether physical or mental, feels like a violation of some unspoken rule. If we're not actively absorbed in something, learning a new topic, chasing a new idea, starting a new project, fixing something, improving ourselves, we start turning inward. We berate ourselves for resting, for pausing, for not catching up to whatever invisible standard we've decided we're behind. Stillness feels wrong. Silence feels suspicious. Doing nothing feels irresponsible. But lately, I've been sitting with my thoughts anyway. And in that quiet, I've caught glimpses of something I've wanted more than anything else for most of my life: clarity. Not the kind that demands action, not the kind that comes with a checklist, but the clarity that arrives after you finally understand the emotional cost of living for years, decades, in a state of ADHD-related demoralization. Today, I want to talk about what's happening in my mind and body as I let that understanding settle. ADHD-related demoralization is the emotional cost of living with an unaccommodated neurodevelopmental disorder. It can look like depression. It can live alongside depression, and it is very often mistaken for it. But demoralization isn't driven by mood, it's driven by chronic failure, repeated effort without reward, years of trying to function in systems that quietly punish how your brain works. When we miss that distinction, we don't just miss the diagnosis, we miss the truth. And that leads to years of ineffective treatment, misplaced responsibility, and deep self blame. I was diagnosed with ADHD in my mid 40s. By that point, I had fought myself long enough. I needed to know if something, anything, could make a difference. In the modern world, difference usually means medication. And so begins the dance: finding the right prescription, the right dosage, navigating refill rules, making monthly calls that somehow always feel accusatory. What struck me most wasn't the process itself. It was what didn't happen afterward. Diagnosis? Check. Prescription? Check. Follow up? Nothing. No one explained how my brain actually worked. No one talked about what decades of compensation might have done to my nervous system. No one mentioned demoralization. So, like many of us, I started researching on my own. I learned something surprising. The prefrontal cortex in a person with ADHD can be delayed by 2 to 5 years compared to a neurotypical brain. That's the part of the brain responsible for executive function, working memory, cognitive flexibility, impulse control, planning and organization, self monitoring. And suddenly, everything clicked. That's why I've always felt 10 years behind my peers. That's why timing has always felt off. That's why "you should have known this by now" landed so painfully. It would have been especially helpful to know this earlier, especially as a parent trying to understand why my daughter wasn't maturing at the same pace as her classmates. That moment alone was clarifying. One of the quieter superpowers of ADHD is our relationship with information. We love it. We gather it, we absorb it, we connect it to dozens of other things we've picked up along the way. We talk about it enthusiastically and then promptly forget most of it, except for the parts that matter. At least that's how it works for me. I've always loved learning because it helps me understand the world. It helps me orient myself. It gives me clarity. And lately, The quiet, actual stillness has allowed me to access memories and thoughts I haven't touched in decades. Not because I was trying to dig them up, but because I stopped moving. By staying still, I've started forming what feels like a spider web of connections between experiences, patterns, sensations, beliefs. Some of those connections are uncomfortable. Some of them lead to memories I intentionally blocked because they hurt too much. But many of them feel less like uncovering something new and more like removing a blindfold. Like the information was there the whole time, just waiting for me to stop masking long enough to see it. A few days ago, I noticed something else. Every time I let the mask drop long enough to make a new connection, my body responded. I felt peaceful, not excited, not energized, peaceful. I've always known ADHD affects my body more than people expect. The constant cycle of tensing and relaxing, holding my breath without realizing it, bracing. That's been my baseline for as long as I can remember. But lately I've been relaxing more than tensing, exhaling more than holding my breath. My nervous system has been adjusting alongside my understanding in a way I didn't anticipate. Clarity isn't just happening in my head, it's happening in my body. I think most of us have a complicated relationship with clarity. We want it because clarity means we can act. But acting requires readiness. And when you're not ready, avoidance becomes easier. Avoidance has been my primary survival strategy for most of my life. Not because I didn't care, but because clarity felt dangerous. Because knowing too much would have required me to face things I wasn't equipped to handle and make decisions that could have led to mistakes. I'm ready to take the blindfold off, not to rush forward, not to reinvent myself, but to actually see what's next. Clarity, I'm learning, doesn't demand movement. It doesn't insist on answers. It simply creates space. Space to choose more carefully. Space to stop betraying myself. Space to let discernment replace urgency. This doesn't feel like momentum yet. It feels like alignment. And for the first time, that feels like enough. I'll be back next time to talk about what clarity makes possible, not in action, but in choice. Until then, give yourself grace. You've been listening to Demoralized with Molly Kellogg-Schmauch.